Towards the end of 2025, the global financial world faced an unprecedented shock. One of the senior executives of the World Bank, James Richardson, suddenly and surprisingly resigned. But this was no ordinary resignation. The documents he left behind and leaked information contained clues about a colossal project that threatened the very foundations of global finance. According to Richardson's leaked documents, there was a secret and highly ambitious plan behind Burkina Faso leader Ibrahim Traoré. The plan aimed to make the African continent completely economically independent by 2030. Moreover, this independence would not be merely rhetorical. The continent would sever its dependence on Western financial institutions and build new financial structures using its own resources. Traoré's plan was shaped with the financial backing of China and oil-rich Gulf states. This support would enable African countries to develop without relying on Western banks and international financial institutions. This move threatened to put an end to the more than $50 billion annual income stream Europe had been deriving from Africa. Ibrahim Traoré was a young rising leader in Burkina Faso, known for initiating radical changes in his region. He was taking firm steps to end corruption, colonial legacies, and economic dependency in his country. However, his greatest move was the secret project he was conducting to ensure Africa's financial independence. Traoré's vision was not limited to Burkina Faso, but aimed to encompass the entire continent. He targeted creating a new economic union among sub-Saharan African countries, establishing their own currencies and financial institutions. The core of this plan was to break the influence of Western banks and the IMF over the region. China and Gulf countries pledged to provide billions of dollars in funding to invest in Africa's infrastructure, technology, and energy projects. Thanks to this support, Africa was set to take major steps toward becoming a new global economic power. James Richardson, a senior executive at the World Bank, had been at the heart of the global financial system for many years. However, what he learned about Traoré's project and the stance his institution took against this change deeply disturbed him. According to leaked documents, the World Bank and Western financial circles were preparing various diplomatic and financial maneuvers to block Africa's economic independence plan. Richardson believed these policies were unjust for the African people. Eventually, Richardson resigned from his position and revealed the collaboration with China and Gulf countries supporting the project. His brave move caused seismic effects in the global financial markets and raised hopes that Africa's destiny was about to change. Traoré's project was more than just a symbolic independence movement. He prepared a comprehensive roadmap to redraw Africa's financial map entirely. In this roadmap, new continental banking system, sub-Saharan African countries would establish a banking system that would facilitate capital transfers among themselves, stabilize their currencies, and be closed off to external interventions. This system was designed considering the region's unique risks and opportunities, local currencies and digital money. The plan included projects for a common digital currency among regional countries to ensure fixed exchange rates and facilitate trade. This would reduce dependency on international reserve currencies like the dollar and euro, energy and infrastructure investments, with funding from China and the Gulf. Africa's energy infrastructure, primarily renewable energy sources, would be strengthened. Energy independence was seen as a critical pillar of economic development, education and technology transfer. The project also included education programs to increase youth participation in the economy, focusing on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Continental cooperation in digital economy and artificial intelligence was planned. This massive plan aimed to transform Africa from a continent that only exported raw materials into a global economic player. As Traoré's project became known, massive concern and panic broke out in Western financial circles. Banks based in Europe and the US were calculating that their over $50 billion annual revenue from Africa would be drastically cut by this new order. Diplomatic pressure, Western countries began applying political and economic pressures on some African leaders to halt the project. Institutions like the IMF and the World Bank imposed various sanctions and credit restrictions to prevent countries from integrating into the new financial systems. Media campaigns. Western media tried to portray Traoré as risky, populist, and destabilizing. Claims were spread that the project would fail, isolate Africa, and lead to economic collapse. Financial sabotage attempts. Reports emerged that some Western institutions planned cyberattacks and economic sabotage against Africa's financial infrastructure. However, African countries received technical support from China and the Gulf to defend against these attacks. China had already been a major player in Africa's economic growth and investments. However, Traoré's plan positioned China in an even more strategic role. China became both the main supporter and technological infrastructure provider for Africa's new financial structure. The Gulf countries, looking to diversify their oil revenues and expand their global influence, showed great interest in the African project. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and others began establishing new energy projects, financial centers, and investment funds in Africa. This partnership accelerated Africa's detachment from Western-centered financial systems and increased the continent's power to determine its own fate. Ibrahim Traoré was not only a firm and determined leader, but also known for his strategic intelligence and diplomatic skills. His African independence project resonated in many countries and regions across the continent. Alliances with regional leaders. Traoré held secret meetings with leaders of major economies like Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. While some leaders supported the project, others hesitated. Their support was crucial for the project's success. Public support. African populations, filled with hope against centuries of external dependency and exploitation, embraced the project. Grassroots movements emerged among youth, women, and entrepreneurs. Opposition. However, some political groups and business circles influenced by Western interests opposed the project. Traoré's political opponents tried to label it as a dangerous adventure that would harm the continent. The documents leaked by James Richardson exposed not only the project, but also the dirty relationships and interest-driven policies of the global financial world. The documents detailed how Western financial institutions controlled African resources, made local economies dependent, and protected their interests through political interventions. They revealed how international financial regulations were manipulated, the dark sides of tax evasion, money laundering, and resource plundering. Richardson's revelations made a huge impact in the global media and turned Africa's economic independence struggle into a global symbol. One of the concrete steps of Traoré's project was the union of West African countries to establish a new financial center in Lome. This center would enable fast, secure, and independent financial transactions among sub-Saharan African countries, managed the newly created digital currency, AfriCoin, and facilitated regional trade, was equipped with technical and financial support from China and the Gulf. This step significantly reduced Africa's dependence on Western financial institutions and accelerated intracontinental economic integration. Western powers, desperate to block Africa's economic independence move, resorted to economic sanctions beyond diplomatic channels. Credit restrictions and investment bans were imposed on some African countries. Western financial institutions increased tariffs on certain raw materials imported from Africa. Media intensified smear campaigns claiming Africa's independence project would destabilize the region and increase poverty. Nonetheless, African countries strengthened solidarity and deepened cooperation with China and the Gulf to create alternative funding channels. Traoré's project not only impacted high-level financial and political arenas but also brought fundamental changes to the daily lives of ordinary Africans. Rural development, thanks to investments from China and the Gulf, new electricity grids, clean water sources, and modern agricultural technologies spread across rural areas. Agricultural productivity increased, and poverty and hunger rates decreased. Education and youth employment, digital literacy and technical training programs rapidly spread among youth. Technology centers provided young people with skills to integrate into the global economy, women's economic participation. The project supported microcredit programs, entrepreneurship support, and educational projects to increase women's involvement in the economy. Women started their own businesses. Use of digital currency. The digital currency AfriCoin became widespread in daily shopping, official payments, and trade, especially in cities, reducing cash use and increasing economic dynamism. Ibrahim Traoré became a figure with both supporters and opponents on the global stage. Supporters, leaders of China, Gulf countries, African Union officials, and many developing country leaders supported Traoré's vision. Africa's new economic model was defended in international forums. Opponents, the US, European Union, and some international financial institutions labeled Traoré risky and populist. Some former colonial powers were accused of fueling political instability in Africa. International media, the global press closely followed Traoré's project. Some media outlets portrayed him as a brave reformer, while others emphasized the continent's conflicting interests. Africa's economic independence drive naturally faced several challenges and internal struggles. Political instability. In some countries, anti-project groups organized coups, assassination attempts, and media campaigns to break Traoré's influence. Economic challenges. The new financial system and gaining trust for the digital currency took time. Inflation caused temporary economic fluctuations in some regions. Cultural and linguistic differences. Africa's multicultural structure complicated taking continental financial and economic decisions. However, continuous dialogue among leaders aimed to overcome these barriers. Ibrahim Traoré had been a passionate leader aiming to change Africa's destiny since his youth. He was seen not only as a politician but also as a visionary, strategist, and voice of the people. Childhood and youth. Traoré was born in a rural area of Burkina Faso to a poor farming family. He personally experienced poverty at a young age, shaping his life philosophy, education, and political entry. He studied economics and international relations at university and contemplated post-colonial African problems. He entered politics young, fighting for justice and independence. Leadership philosophy. Traoré saw leadership not as a privilege, but as a responsibility to serve his people. He focused on policies that prioritized his people and sought real development. Struggle against difficulties. Despite internal and external pressures when he took office, he never gave up. His greatest strength was maintaining composure during crises and developing the right strategy. With the spread and support of Traoré's plan, the world economy and power balances experienced great change. Decline of Western powers, Europe and the US, gradually lost their global economic dominance as revenues from Africa diminished. New alliances, China, Gulf countries, and Africa's new financial unity laid the foundation for a multipolar world order. Financial system revolution. Digital currencies and independent financial institutions changed international trade rules. Africa became an active player in the global economy, not just a resource supplier. Redefining global economic stability, the new system offered a vision for a fairer, more inclusive, and sustainable economy. James Richardson's resignation was not just a personal choice, but a symbol of global awakening. As Africa moved toward its 2030 goal, the world stepped into a new era. African countries declared economic independence and became powerful players at the global negotiation table. The World Bank and Western financial institutions had to reconsider their relations with Africa. Traoré's vision became an example for other developing countries. The economic revolution that began on the continent ultimately influenced the shaping of the entire world economy. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, Africa implemented a series of banking reforms to gain financial independence. Founding AfriBank, established under Traoré's leadership, started operating as a united and independent financial institution across the continent. This bank directly financed the African economy, replacing traditional Western banks. Microfinance and local entrepreneurship. AfriBank supported small businesses and rural entrepreneurs with microfinance projects, increasing economic mobility and employment. Digital banking infrastructure. With technological investments, digital banking spread rapidly across Africa. Millions of people opened bank accounts and integrated into their economic system for the first time. China and Gulf countries did not leave Africa alone on its road to economic independence. Infrastructure projects. China increased Africa's trade capacity by building railways, ports, power plants, and communication infrastructure. Renewable energy. Investments. Gulf countries invested heavily to harness Africa's solar and wind energy potential. Technology transfer. Chinese advanced technology firms established tech parks in Africa, supporting local innovation. Western financial institutions had to develop new strategies in the face of changes in Africa. Innovative business models. The World Bank and IMF tried to develop policies more compatible and supportive of Africa. Dialogue and cooperation. Some Western countries started talks to integrate with Africa's new economic systems. Risk management. Financial institutions updated their infrastructure to adapt to new currencies and digital banking systems in Africa. Economic independence led to significant social and political changes in African countries. Fight against corruption. New financial transparency systems. Reduced corruption rates. Democratization process. Democratic institutions and civil society movements strengthened in economically empowered countries. Youth movements. As youth gained economic freedom, they became more active in political processes. Chapter 21. Digital Revolution and the Rise of Africoin. One of the most remarkable aspects of Africa's economic independence project was the launch of the digital currency Africoin. Africoin's technological infrastructure, developed with support from Chinese tech firms. Africoin offered secure and fast blockchain-based transactions, greatly reducing money laundering and fraud. User-friendly interfaces. With the widespread use of smartphones, Africoin-based applications rapidly spread in both rural and urban areas. International trade. Africoin became the standard currency for trade among African countries, eliminating exchange rate risks and increasing trade volume. With its new financial structure, Africa rose to a much stronger position on the international stage. New voice in G20 and UN. African countries began to more strongly defend their economic interests. At G20 summits and United Nations meetings. New trade agreements. Collaborations with China and Gulf countries reorganized Africa's energy and raw material exports in a mutually beneficial way. Multipolar world order. Africa's independent economic structure contributed to the replacement of a unipolar world order with a multipolar system. After resigning from the World Bank, Richardson embarked on a new mission. Africa Development Initiative. He founded an independent organization supporting Africa's new financial systems and promoting sustainable development. International conferences. Organized global conferences defending Africa's economic independence project. Media and awareness. Continued to expose corruption and exploitation in the global financial world. As 2030 approached, Africa entered a new era as an economically independent continent with strong financial institutions and technological infrastructure. Development and prosperity. Poverty rates decreased, and education and health services improved. Global power. Africa became an important part of the world economy. Unity and solidarity. Peace and cooperation prevailed on the continent. By 2030, Ibrahim Traorés' vision had transformed not only the African continent but the entire world. Africa broke the chains of centuries-old colonial economic systems and emerged as a strong actor that determined its own destiny. Thanks to new financial systems, digital currencies, and independent banking structures, Africa made significant leaps in technology, energy, agriculture, and industry, directly improving the lives of billions. Western powers had lost their old privileges, and global power balances underwent radical changes. The world economy evolved into a multipolar structure, and Africa's voice was louder than ever on international platforms. James Richardson's courageous resignation became a milestone in the global financial world, and Traorés' project became a symbol of hope and freedom called the African Independence Project. Africa's struggle for independence and development. went down in human history as one of the greatest economic and social revolutions. This victory offered not only the continent but the entire world a promise for a fairer, sustainable, and more equitable future. Thus, the secret $50 billion project initiated under Ibrahim Traorés leadership opened the doors to Africa's new era and proved to the world that economic independence is possible. Please write your thoughts about the story in the comments.